Well, what's self-esteem? It's a word. Actually, it's two words, right? But, you know, and it's sort of something you think you might have or not have, but that's a figure of speech. That's not an empirical phenomena. And so most of extroversion is just neuroticism, as it turns out. It's like if you have a lot of negative emotion, you don't feel that good about yourself. Well, isn't that a surprise? You have a lot of negative emotion. You know, and if you want to fix it up a little bit, then you can also subtract positive emotion from that, because if you have a lot of negative emotion and you don't have a lot of positive emotion, so that's neuroticism minus extroversion, then your self-esteem is even lower. You know, and then maybe over time, conscientiousness starts to make a bit of a difference, right? Because if you're conscientious and you work hard, you can start to see that that's paying off, and Caffarotti's done some work that seems to sort of indicate that. But, you know, the first thing that happened is everybody went on a self-esteem bender, even though the measures were pretty appalling, and even though you could, you know, model it with the big five. And then one of the things that happened as a consequence of that was that the whole California school system started to teach students self-esteem. It's like, A, what makes you think you should have high self-esteem? Like maybe you're a miserable little worm. God only knows, right? It's not the case that you should have a good opinion of yourself in every bloody situation. You know, what if you're a bully who pounds people out in the schoolyard? Bullies, by the way, do have higher self-esteem than normal. So because it's not like they're feeling bad about themselves when they pound you, they're feeling bad about you. And the best work, you know, the low self-esteem equals bully hypothesis, lots of people believe that, but if you read Dan Olweus, who's the world's leading authority on bullying and who's actually done something about it, what he says is that bullies have inappropriately high self-esteem, which is why they think they're in a perfectly good position to pound you out if you happen to be on the playground. So it's not like they're suffering from a, you know, neurotic weakness of self-image. It's quite the contrary. So anyways, in the California school system, they tried to teach kids self-esteem. And, you know, there's no evidence that you can do that first, because neuroticism is actually quite hard to shift. So, and if we knew how to treat it, well, hooray, everybody would be thrilled about that, but it's not easy. That self-esteem training has just, you know, made younger people like you guys more, what do you call that? Narcissistic. Yeah, because the self-esteem becomes disconnected from the actual accomplishment, because you might hope, well, you'd sort of feel good. How good should you feel about yourself? Well, you know, you might say, well, you should grant yourself the right to exist like you do everyone else. You know, that's sort of like a basic human right. As a human being, you're valuable. And then maybe you should sort of think you're about as valuable as other people roughly think you are. That seems about right, right? So the right amount of self-esteem would be your perception of your value within the context of a group. It's got to be something like that. You know, so there should be a concordance, because like maybe you need to improve. Could well be, you know. And are you going to improve if you're feeling really good about yourself? Well, the answer to that is, well, we don't know. How much misery about yourself do you have to have before you're motivated to improve yourself? None? Well, that doesn't seem right, but we also don't know whether it's shame or guilt or anxiety or pain or, you know, these negative emotions that motivate you. Now, it's clear that if you have enough negative emotion, that can paralyze you. But that's like depression and you know, psychiatrically high levels of anxiety. That's not like low self-esteem. So that's a problem. Emotional intelligence? Not only does that probably not exist because it's agreeableness, you know how you always hear you need emotional intelligence to thrive in the workplace? It's like, turns out that's exactly backwards. Disagreeable people do better as managers in the workplace. So it's actually, if you lack emotional intelligence, you're more likely to be an effective manager. So an emotional intelligence is a great, you know, indicator of sort of pathology and psychology, because it was invented by a journalist. You know, you can't just have some word invented by a journalist and then go make a whole bloody, you know, enterprise out of it. You got to find out if it's really there. And there's not a lot of evidence that it is. And what does it mean anyways? Emotional intelligence. What does that mean? I can infer what you're feeling? Well, is that IQ? Like, are smart people better at that? Or like, am I mirroring you in some way? Or do I care for you? Like, maybe I can figure out exactly what you're feeling and I just don't give a damn. You know, is that still emotional intelligence? Well, I don't know, right? How would you separate that from sympathy or empathy? And what if you're oversympathetic to someone? Is that emotional intelligence? Like, maybe you feel way too sorry for your children. So it's like you're all empathetic and all that, but you're not doing them any good. Or sometimes you would be, but sometimes you should say, you know, quit whining, go the hell outside. Because that's the right response sometimes. So these things are not straightforward at all.